They taped the notice to my windshield, right over the laminated memorial card I kept there for my late wife. Remove unauthorized vessel from community lake within 48 hours or face daily fines of $500. Failure to comply may result in towing at owner's expense. The paper shook in my hands, not from fear, but from the sheer gall of it. My boat, my dock, my lake. Where are you watching from, by the way? Drop it in the comments. I love seeing how far these stories reach. And if you enjoy smart takedowns and real justice, hit that subscribe button. You don't want to miss what happens next. My name is Colin Graves, and until recently, I was just a semi-retired civil engineer trying to rebuild my life after cancer took my wife, Lauren. We'd spent 28 years together. The first time I saw her smile was on a lake. The last time I held her hand was on one, too, though that one, frozen in February, didn't glisten the same. When she passed, I left the city, sold the house, and bought a quiet piece of property outside Savannah. It came with a modest two-bedroom home, a private dock, and, most importantly, a lake, technically a spring-fed reservoir. But to us, it was just ours. Lauren used to say water had memory. I believed it. I spent weeks fixing up the place, sanded the old boat dock, repainted the deck, installed solar lights. The aluminum boat, the same one we took on our anniversary fishing trips, was the last thing I rolled into place. It sat gently tied to the post, rocking with the breeze. I thought we'd finally found peace. Until the HOA came knocking. Technically, Lakeside Glen wasn't my HOA. My property sat just outside the main neighborhood, separated by an old stone wall and the lake itself. But the association, run by a group of well-dressed retirees with too much time and too many rules, believed they governed everything the water touched. Their first letter was polite. "We noticed a vessel has appeared on the lake near parcel 11B, it read, as if the boat had floated in mysteriously. They respectfully reminded me that all lake activity had to be pre-approved by the HOA Recreation Committee, of which I was not a member. I ignored it. Their second letter wasn't as kind. It cited Regulation 4.3.7, a clause about unregistered equipment in common access bodies of water, and demanded immediate compliance. Then came the notice. Ours, or else. I might have let it slide. I might have laughed it off. But what set me off wasn't the fine. It was the attached photo. They'd walked onto my dock, they'd stepped onto my property, without notice, without permission, and snapped a picture of my boat like I was some criminal squatter. They even left muddy footprints on the planks I'd spent hours staining and sealing. I walked outside and stood at the edge of the dock, the letter still in my hand. The lake rippled gently. A single duck flapped across the far side. And in the distance, on the opposite shore, I saw it. The small wooden clubhouse painted white and green with the sign out front. Lakeside Glen Anglers Club. Members only. They hosted weekend fishing tournaments there. Potlucks. Guest lectures on bass. Migration and tackle upgrades. I'd seen the photos in the local newsletter. I never cared. But now I cared. Because these people had been casting lines and parking boats on this lake for years, treating it like their own, without knowing a single truth. I owned the lake. Not part of it. Not a shared claim. All of it. When I bought the property, the previous owner, a quiet man named Edward Grafton, had included a detail my realtor said was unusual. The lake wasn't HOA-owned. It had been part of the original farm that was later subdivided to build Lakeside Glen. When the neighborhood was developed, the parcels sold around the lake, but the lake itself stayed with Grafton. He sold it to me, deed and all. It had never come up, until now. So when they threatened to tow my boat from my lake, I didn't call. I didn't write. I didn't argue. I made a plan. The first step was pulling up the HOA's founding documents. Public record, 48 pages of jargon, maps, bylaws, and signatures. I scanned for anything referencing lake ownership. There was none. They had jurisdiction over landscaping, mailboxes, and noise levels, but not the lake. Every reference to the water listed it as an external shared view feature, not a common amenity. They'd simply treated it like theirs for so long that everyone believed it, including them. The second step was a visit to the county records office. The clerk, an older woman with glasses and a coffee-stained folder, chuckled when I showed her. "The violation notice. They've been giving people grief for years," she said. "Had a whole drama over bird feeders last fall." "Can you confirm this parcel?" I asked, pointing at the plat map. She peered at the screen. "Sure can. That lake belongs entirely to Parcel 17C, that's you." "Thanks," I said. "Would you mind printing me an official copy?" She raised an eyebrow. "You planning to shake things up?" I smiled. "I just want to go fishing." Back at home, I framed the parcel map and the deed together in a black walnut frame, hung it right by the front door, not because I expected company, but because I wanted to see it every day from now on. I also began documenting everything. Every email, every notice, every violation. I even installed a small motion camera facing the dock. If they stepped foot on it again, I'd have proof. 3 days later, I got a second notice. This one came with a printed warning. "As a repeated violator, you may be referred to the Lakeside Glen Compliance Committee." It was signed, get this, by the same man who I'd seen in the newsletter smiling as he accepted a fishing trophy on the lake. I couldn't help but laugh, because they still didn't know. They thought they were playing with power. They didn't realize I was holding the entire board, and I was just getting ready to play my hand. 2 days after I received the second notice, I got a knock at my door. Not a friendly one. 3 sharp raps, no pause, no smile on the other side. When I opened it, a tall man in an HOA windbreaker stood on my porch holding a clipboard and a laminated badge that said Enforcement Officer, Lakeside Glen HOA. Behind him, 2 other board members loitered near the sidewalk pretending to check their phones while clearly watching. "Colin Graves?" the man asked stiffly. "Yes." He flipped open a folder. "This is your final written warning. Your vessel remains in violation of Community Code 4.3.7. If it is not removed by end of day tomorrow, towing will proceed." I raised an eyebrow. "And what towing company did you find that's willing to trespass on private property and haul a boat off a privately owned dock?" He blinked. "The lake is community access." "No," I said, stepping aside and pointing at the framed documents by my door. "The lake is Parcel 17C, and I own it." He followed my finger, eyes scanning the large county map and notarized deed. His lips parted slightly, as if his brain was trying to catch up to his mouth. We weren't informed." "You were never entitled," I interrupted calmly. "You've been using this lake without permission for years. You assumed no one would ever check. But now I have. And you're standing on my property." The clipboard dipped. His face reddened. "This will need to be reviewed by the board." "I'd expect nothing less," I said. "But from here on out, no one steps on my dock again without written permission. If they do, I'll file trespassing charges." He turned and left without a word. The other 2 board members followed, one of them looking back with an expression that was less fury and more fear. That evening, I opened a blank file on my laptop and titled it, Lakeside Glen, Unauthorized Use and Civil Violations, I listed. Every incident I could recall. The years the fishing club hosted open events, photos of their member-exclusive dock installation, HOA newsletters boasting about lake access events, the zoning filings which listed the lake as privately owned but never properly disclosed to residents. It was a treasure trove of overreach. Still, I knew I'd need more than paperwork to make this stick. I needed voices, others who had felt the weight of the HOA's petty tyranny. So I called up a local I'd met at the hardware store a few weeks back. Frank Monroe, retired Coast Guard officer, ex-lawyer, and longtime Lakeside Glen resident. We'd bonded over lumber prices and old base reels. When I told him what was happening, he laughed so hard I heard his dog start barking in the background. She tried to fine me once for having a U.S. flag too large for my porch, he said. My flag. On Flag Day. Still got that citation? I laminated it, he said proudly. Come by tomorrow, 10 a.m. Frank's house was a fortress of war medals and sarcastic cross-stitch pillows. He led me into his den, poured black coffee into 2 mismatched mugs, and laid out a binder like a war general unveiling blueprints. This, he said, slapping the cover, is the unofficial HOA complaint book. Been adding to it since 2015. It was a masterpiece of quiet rebellion. Dozens of pages documenting HOA fines, emails, inconsistent enforcement, and suspicious changes to rules mid-year. Frank had receipts. Literally. She fined the Gonzaleses for a birthday banner, he muttered, flipping pages. But the Morgans put one up for their dog's birthday the same week. No citation. You starting to see the pattern? I was. And it was bigger than me or my boat. Frank leaned back, arms crossed. So what's your angle? You gonna sue? Not yet. First, I want them to sweat. Then I want the truth exposed. He grinned. You want help? Yes. And a few other voices. He tapped the mug. You'll have 'em by Friday. Sure. Enough by the end of the week I'd met with 5 other longtime residents, each with their own HOA horror story. A woman fined for wind chimes. A single father accused of excessive gatherings for letting his kids play outside. An elderly couple who paid thousands in landscaping citations while the board president's front yard looked like a junkyard. These weren't angry rebels. They were exhausted neighbors, and they were ready. We formed a private group chat. We called it Doc Rights. Frank, of course, suggested we spell it Doc Rights, like a secret society. We laughed, but the mission was clear. Watch, document, and wait for the right moment. Meanwhile, I prepared my next move. With Margot's help, another neighbor and retired title lawyer, I drafted a formal notice of revocation addressed to the Lakeside Glen Anglers Club. It was polite, firm, legally binding. Effective immediately, you are hereby notified that all unauthorized use of Parcel 17C, commonly referred to as Lakeside Glen Lake, is prohibited. The lake is privately owned. Any use of docks, boats, or water-based activity must cease within 72 hours. Violations will result in trespassing enforcement. We printed 10 copies and hand-delivered them. 1 to the HOA board president. 1 to each fishing club officer, 1 to the mayor's office, just in case they got cute. On Saturday morning, I walked to my dock with a drill and a heavy oak sign I'd commissioned from a local shop. Burned. Into the wood were the words, "Private Lake. Trespassers will be prosecuted." I mounted it just above the old mooring post. Then I sat on the dock and waited. At precisely 10:12 a.m., a small electric fishing boat emerged from the far side of the lake. 2 men aboard, sipping coffee, rods already in motion. I watched as they glided across the glassy water, and then noticed me sitting there, arms crossed. They slowed. One of them squinted. The other tapped the other's arm and pointed at the sign. Then they turned around and paddled back in silence. I didn't wave. Didn't need to. The message was received, but the biggest message was yet to come. The HOA had scheduled a public meeting the following Thursday. Topic: Lake Regulation and Community Recreation Access. Frank sent me a screenshot of the announcement. The wording was careful, vague, but I saw the panic between the lines. They knew the storm was coming, and I was bringing the flood. The HOA meeting was scheduled for 6 p.m. Thursday night in the Lakeside Glen Clubhouse, a faux colonial building with squeaky floorboards, dusty blinds, and a framed portrait of the founding board president hanging lopsided behind the podium like he was still watching. I arrived 10 minutes early with Frank, Margot, and 2 new faces from our group. The room was already half full. Neighbors seated in plastic chairs, murmuring, glancing at the lake regulation and recreation access agenda like it was a death notice for their Saturday morning fishing trips. Patricia Walton, the board president, stood behind the podium, shuffling papers and adjusting her microphone like a politician prepping for damage control. She was dressed in her usual pastel blouse and pearls, trying her best to look composed. But her eyes flicked. To me, the moment I entered, her jaw clenched. Good. I sat in the second row, close enough to be seen but not center stage. I wanted her to know I was watching, listening, ready. Good evening, everyone, she began, tapping the mic twice. Tonight's meeting is focused on recent confusion regarding lake access and community recreation usage. Confusion. That was cute. She continued. There have been claims made regarding ownership and jurisdiction of the lake, claims that have caused some distress in our community. Distress? Lady, I caught you fishing on someone else's land for years and now you're upset because you got reeled in. Patricia cleared her throat and pressed on. We're currently in communication with county officials and legal counsel to determine the full extent of property boundaries and community rights. Until then, we ask for everyone's patience and cooperation. Frank leaned over and muttered, That's lawyer speak for, we screwed up but can't admit it yet. A few hands went up in the audience. What about the fishing tournament next month? Someone asked. Can we still use the dock on the East Shore? Another said. Patricia raised her hands in what was meant to be a calming gesture. We're working toward a resolution that preserves access for long-standing members. Please understand, this is a complicated matter. That was my cue. I stood up, calmly, slowly. Madam President, I said, loud enough for the whole room to hear, would you like me to clarify the ownership issue right now? All eyes turned. Patricia hesitated. Mr. Graves, this is a board meeting. Yes, I replied. A board meeting discussing a property that you don't own, and haven't, for the last 9 months. I pulled out a folded document from my inside jacket pocket and walked toward the front. This is the deed, I said, unfolding it and laying it gently on the table beside her. County certified, parcel 17C, entire lake, entire shoreline, I own all of it. Someone in the back let out an audible, whoa. Patricia's face flushed a deep red. That can't be right, she said, voice brittle. The HOA has been managing lake events for years. Managing without legal right, I said. Hosting fishing tournaments, installing docks, collecting fees, all on private property that you never leased, never maintained, and never asked permission to use. Murmurs erupted. A man in the third row snapped a photo of the document with his phone. I looked at the crowd. For those unaware, this body of water is not HOA owned. It never has been. It was excluded from the original development plat and retained by the prior landowner, who sold it to me. What's more? I held up another page, this one laminated. I've officially revoked all unauthorized recreational use, effective immediately. That includes the fishing club. A gasp this time. Real, shocked silence. Is this true? Someone asked aloud. Patricia didn't answer. She stared at the deed like it was a ghost. I kept going. Let me be clear. I'm not doing this to spite anyone. I moved here after losing my wife. This lake was supposed to be a peaceful place for healing. Instead, I was harassed, threatened, given violation, notices by people who didn't even realize they were trespassing on my land. I looked directly at Patricia. You fined me for a boat you didn't have authority over. You threatened to tow property from a dock that doesn't belong to you, and you allowed your fishing club to use my shoreline for years without a single word of acknowledgement. She finally found her voice. This isn't how we do things, she said quietly. No, I replied. This is how I do things. Legally, transparently, and with boundaries you refuse to respect. The room was silent again, but this time it was heavy with realization. Margot stood next. I can confirm the deed and the parcel ownership. I reviewed it myself. I'm a retired title attorney. Frank raised a hand. Can we motion for a formal community apology? Because I've lived here 15 years and this is the first time I've seen the board embarrassed into silence. That broke the tension. A few people laughed. Nervous, but real. Patricia tried to regain control. We'll have to revisit our procedures and speak with legal. You do that, I said, turning back to the audience. In the meantime, Rachel's Lake is now private. No more fishing club, no more HOA events. Unless they go through me like anyone else would on private property. Rachel's Lake? Someone asked. I smiled. Named it after my wife. She loved the water, would have wanted it protected. People started clapping. Actual clapping. Not everyone. But enough to make Patricia's face harden like stone. After the meeting, several residents came up to me, quietly, one by one. Didn't know they didn't own the lake. They've been bullying us for years. Thank you. Seriously. Even the guy who ran the HOA landscaping committee gave me a sheepish nod and said, honestly, this needed to happen. I returned home that night and stood on the dock under the stars. The water shimmered quietly. The wind moved through the trees. And for the first time in a year, it felt like peace. Not forced, not stolen, earned. But I wasn't done yet, because Patricia didn't go down easy. The next morning, I woke up to an envelope taped to my mailbox. Inside was a letter from the HOA lawyer citing community disruption and suggesting I was in violation of broader neighborhood harmony protocols. Laughed. Harmony protocols. Then I forwarded the letter to my own attorney, who'd already filed notice of potential counterclaims for trespassing, unauthorized land use, and harassment. Let them try. I wasn't just holding the deed now, I was holding the narrative. And Patricia, she had no lake, no control, and soon no board. 3 days after the meeting, the fishing club shut down. The once active clubhouse, with its lawn chairs and faded banners, sat empty. No potlucks, no tournaments, just a locked door and a sign hastily taped over the original one. Closed until further notice, HOA review pending. Patricia hadn't said a word since the meeting. Not to me, not to the other residents. She'd vanished into the folds of procedural silence, the kind of retreat only petty authority figures make when their power evaporates. But her allies hadn't forgotten. The very next week, a new HOA Lake Harmony initiative was announced in the community newsletter. It was filled with vague language about reassessing neighborhood relationships and reclaiming community identity. Buried deep in the message, I found the real kicker, a request for donations to form a legal defense fund to challenge unjust property claims. Translation: they wanted to sue me. They never got the chance. Because while Patricia played emotional PR in a newsletter, I filed something far more tangible, an official cease and desist letter from my attorney, citing trespassing, harassment, and unlicensed use of privately owned land over a multi-year period. Accompanying that was a formal invoice, $1,900. Itemized: unauthorized fishing tournaments, dock installation, environmental runoff from HOA club activity, property violations, legal costs. I didn't expect payment, but I did expect panic. It arrived. The next morning in the form of a call from her attorney. I'm sure we can come to a mutually agreeable resolution, he offered. Perhaps we can schedule mediation. Not interested, I said. The lake is closed to the HOA, permanently, but surely not interested. Click. 2 days later, Margot informed me that Patricia had scheduled a closed-door emergency board meeting. But what she didn't realize was that 2 members of Doc Rights had already infiltrated the board elections the previous month. We knew everything. The votes were divided. Patricia was panicking. Her support was crumbling. When the official minutes leaked to residents, they showed she'd proposed levying a community-wide special assessment fee to cover her legal initiatives. That was the final straw. the following week. A group of 42 residents submitted a formal petition to audit all HOA board activity over the last 3 years. Margot oversaw the legal language. Frank helped distribute flyers. And me? I just kept fishing, because now I didn't need to speak. The lake spoke for itself. Lily came to visit that weekend. She'd been at college in North Carolina, studying environmental engineering, when she saw the new sign on the dock, Rachel's Lake, private property. She stopped and smiled. She'd love this, Lily said, brushing her hand across the cedar frame. She would, I said, and she'd love what comes next. We spent the afternoon together, father and daughter, casting lines and sharing silence. The kind of peace you don't find often, the kind you have to fight to keep. That night, I hosted a small gathering at the lake. Just a few neighbors, the quiet ones who'd thanked me in passing, the ones who'd never dared speak up before but had now found their voice. We grilled, we laughed. Someone brought iced tea, another brought fishing gear for their kid who had never caught a fish before. The child squealed when they reeled one in, and I swear for a second the whole lake seemed to breathe. "Why don't we make this a monthly thing?" Margot said. "No titles, no fines, no gatekeeping." Everyone agreed. And just like that, Rachel's Lake Community Circle was born, a free, informal gathering to replace the decades of control the HOA had weaponized. No dues, no drama, just connection. Meanwhile, the HOA board began to fracture. After the audit request was filed, 2 board members resigned. A third confessed privately to misusing discretionary funds for landscaping her vacation home. Patricia remained silent, issuing robotic responses through email. But the community had seen too much. Her grip was gone. A month later, the HOA held a vote of no confidence. Patricia lost. Badly. She was removed as board president and replaced by a former school teacher named Eunice Park, a kind, sharp woman with zero patience for political games and a knack for transparency. Her first official act? The HOA recognizes that Rachel's Lake is private property and will cease all prior claims of recreational ownership, effective immediately. Her second? All future community events must go through a resident approval committee, and no individual shall act with unilateral authority without consent. In other words, no more tyrants. I received a handwritten letter from Eunice a week later. "Thank you for standing your ground, Mr. Graves. You didn't just reclaim the lake. You reminded us that leadership must serve, not rule." I pinned it on my fridge, and just when I thought it was all behind me, I received one last visit. It was Patricia. She stood on my gravel path in a pale blue blouse, holding an envelope. "Can we talk?" she asked quietly. I nodded once and led her to the dock. We didn't sit. She handed me the envelope. Inside was a check for $3,500 marked partial payment, unauthorized use. "I can't cover it all," she said, "but it's something." I didn't expect this. "I know," she said. I thought I was protecting the community. I forgot who I was hurting." I nodded. "I'm sorry," she added. There was a long pause. "Thanks for saying it," I said. She turned to leave. "Patricia," I called after her, "if you want to fish here again someday, you'll need to ask." She gave a half smile, the first real one I'd seen from her, and walked away. As the sun dipped behind the trees and the lake shimmered orange, I sat down at the edge of the dock, feet dangling just above the water. Another chapter closed. No lawsuits, no shouting, just dignity, boundaries, and a quiet wind that echoed across the water. Sometimes revenge doesn't need to be loud. Sometimes it just needs to be legal and very, very well timed.